The Halo 2 E3 demo from 2003 is very infamous in the Halo community as it promised a version of Halo 2 that was impossible to play on the original Xbox. Like Sergeant Johnson said in the beginning of this legendary demo,
"No smoke and mirrors pre-recorded bullshit."
A bullshit?
But sadly, this demo was indeed smoke and mirrors. Regardless though, let's revisit one of the most infamous and legendary demos ever shown at E3, the Halo 2 E3 demo. The origin of this demo actually started after the release of the XO2 trailer in 2002 from Bungie. Development for Halo 2 was progressing at Bungie, with many separate teams working on different ideas at the same time. This was also around the same time that Xbox Live had just launched, and developers were now just starting to use the hardware to make some very interesting games using the service. And this was also around the time that despite the huge success from the XO2 trailer and the development kind of progressing pretty slowly with Halo 2, Microsoft put a lot of pressure on Bungie to essentially show something brand new next year, specifically for their E3 presentation, as they wanted to create more awareness for the game but also for the Xbox brand. So with the development of the game progressing pretty slow, with the actual campaign development being especially slow at this point, with many levels of the story only being barely worked on, as a result of all this development, in February of 2003, Bungie decided to make a demo for the game, not a trailer they used the previous year using one of their levels they were developing for the campaign. The demo was intended to be a giant showcase to show off all of the new gameplay elements and all those badass new elements like dual wielding for the new game, and also to show off their new improved graphics engine that they were planning on using for the campaign, which would soon cause issues further down the line. The new engine that they were intended to run the demo on was nicknamed the Pencil engine, and was basically supposed to showcase all of the extensive stencil shadows, normal maps, and all the dynamic lighting that Bungie wanted to use in the demo and also possibly in Halo 2 itself. If you didn't understand some of those terms that I mentioned, I'll just quickly go through them. One of them is stencil. Now, if you don't know what stencil means, it basically means that your game has more deep and darkened shadows. This was a technique very popular in the early 2000s with games. It was basically designed to give the game more depth and also just give it more interesting and dynamic lighting just to make the game a bit more realistic. Some of the more popular games that had this feature actually included Doom 3 from back in the day. And another term that I mentioned that you might not know is actually something called normal maps, which was essentially giving the game more texture, detail, and just overall more graphical fidelity. Bungie essentially put their all into developing this demo, making it a full-on presentation and not using the usual scripted trailers that were usually shown at presentations in the past. In terms of the overall idea of the demo, Bungie wanted to have scripted sequences with story told through gameplay with cinematic qualities, which was becoming a trend back in the early 2000s with many games. Bungie would use their new graphics engine, which obviously would cause a lot of issues when making the demo, especially with slow frame rates and also just making the demo in general hard to run for the developers. It would cause so much issues that Bungie only got the demo running only weeks before the E3 presentation. And for other work on the demo before E3 with recording of the voice actors and music was also put in as very short notice as well, just weeks before the presentation. And finally, when the demo was ready to be shown to the world in E3 2003, it actually included a massive booth for the demo, which included having presentations throughout the day in a theater, and also being live streamed on the E3 stream. And despite some nearly fatal hiccups to the demo, like at one point some audio issues almost crashed the demo, and Bungie luckily had a backup of it to get it running right before the presentations were about to start, overall it went off with a hitch. So regardless though, let's get into the actual content of what this E3 demo contained. The presentation would start with a funny intro from Sergeant Johnson saying that the demo is not smoke and mirrors and it's actually real gameplay. After this, some funny banter would happen between Joe Staten and Sergeant Johnson himself. Joe Staten was the head writer who basically was playing the demo in the scripted path for the audience. Now let's get into the actual demo footage and gameplay. The gameplay starts out similar to the introduction of the Outskirts level in the final game, with the Chief and the Pelican flying down to New Mombasa, basically in this version though titled the New Mombasa East African Protectorate in this game, with also a radically different design from the final game as well. Chief would then get dropped off by some ODSTs and then would transition to gameplay for the demo. The weapon that you have at the beginning of it is basically the early version of the battle rifle. We also see in the beginning that the lighting is extremely different from the final game. You will progress through an active war zone and unite with a sergeant of a pinned Marine squad under fire. Then you will see some scripted events like Marines in a med bay, Marines shooting at enemies, and also longswords bombing a large Covenant artillery cannon in the distance. After these scripted events of the demo, dual wielding would be introduced and combat would start. Chief would soon fight some Covenant forces among some debris, really showing off the dynamic lighting and a lot of the futuristic shooting effects as well. After that brief firefight, then you would get into a Warthog and soon the map will open up massively as basically basically you'll get onto the streets of New Mombasa and take out ghosts and other Covenant vehicles along the way, really showcasing the advanced physics the game was supposed to have, with many standout moments like the Chief hijacking the ghost at some point, which if you watch the demo which was played live, there's even gasp in the theater when it happened at that moment. Eventually though, the demo would wrap up with Chief getting on the highway being cornered in by elites that had been dropped from the sky, and eventually Cortana would make a funny pun, ending the demo.
Bet you can't stick it.
You're on.
Oh, okay. I see what you did there.
Now, the demo that was shown at E3 2003 was really different from the final game, as you can tell, and I want to cover some of the major differences in this demo from the final game, so let's get into it. For one, the demo starts out similar to the start of the mission outskirts in the final game like mentioned, but immediately there's some major differences. For one, the lighting in the demo is different from the final game. The lighting in the demo is more dynamic, with dark deep shadows throughout giving more depth to the characters and models in the game. That's mainly because the demo was using the new pencil engine that Bungie was developing in the game, that brought the new stencil shadows to the gameplay, which these shadows actually were slowly being brought into games in the early 2000s, as developers wanted to create more dynamic lighting for games. The most notable of these was actually the method that was used for Doom 3 a few years later. Also, another difference you can tell from the footage here is actually the concept of normal maps, which were brought in, which actually did make it to the final game. It basically gives more depth to the models and characters and maps in the game, with updated textures, but also the same number of polygons and also with code directing the lighting. The demo, in my opinion, in general, just looks better thanks to those stencil effects and dynamic lighting that makes the game honestly look better than the final game, which the final game just mostly looks pretty flat because it didn't have a lot of those stencil shadows. The next major difference is New Mombasa, which it has a design that's radically different, having more taller buildings and a hive-like design and structure to it, instead of the final game being more of a modeled out flat city. ODSTs look similar to the final game, and now we gotta get into the gameplay itself. One major difference is obviously the lighting, with many objects having shadows in the demo, not so in the final game. There also seems to be more interactive scripted moments in the gameplay, kind of less so in the final game, like seeing scenes of Marines in the med bay or other moments really showing off the intense fight for the pinned down squad from the Covenant forces. Also in terms of performance, pop-ups in the original Halo 2 happened quite a lot, compared to the demo where they're basically non-existent, as the demo runs seemingly better. The most likely cause of this was most likely due to the fact that the Xbox could not load the data quick enough to load the assets that we see in the cutscenes in the game. And this was especially more difficult as it had to load all the assets, all the normal maps and texture layers, and especially with quick cuts like a movie, it didn't really help the situation overall. Another element that's pretty different to the final game is some minor differences in terms of the gameplay, which of course this time around is in a much more scripted manner, as basically Bungie had to do some hacks to make it work, like warping into animations without pressing a button and so on. Further on, other differences include obviously many of the scripted elements and story elements in this demo. Like we see Chief talking to a Sarge, or we've seen longboards bombing a large Covenant artillery cannon, which all of this was cut from the final game. In terms of other gameplay, the dual wielding in this demo is actually less independent, as the weapons actually fire in unison, unlike the final game which they basically fire more independently. It was actually one of the few things I think was an overall huge improvement compared to this version. For further differences compared to the final game, obviously all the design areas that we see in the demo never made it to the final game. These are basically known as the Earth City sections early on in development. This included many brand new areas like more expansive maps with tons of streets, buildings, signs, and overall just looks completely different to the final game, with some of the Earth sections in the final game have more of a cramped alley-like feel to them. And overall, this whole level in general just never showed up in the final game. Also, other gameplay elements that never made it to the final game included weapons and all the lighting that never made it to the final game. This included muzzle flashes and also in general the plasma shooting off from the plasma weapons just being more brighter, with a lot of vehicles and objects and weapons having more shadows on the overall environment. And now we're getting into the more vehicle section of the demo, with big expansive streets, and honestly, I just love the whole design that we see in this demo. I wish we got to see it in the final game. The fighting and vehicle mechanics in this demo are pretty similar to what we got in the final game, but just more scaled down in this section. In terms of physics, there's actually a few differences compared to the final game. All the effects that we see from blowing up the shadows to even causing that chain reaction of causing the civilian cars to blow up as a response is honestly amazing, and really showcases many of the advanced physics that Bungie were working on in this build of the game and are pretty different to the final game in terms of chain reactions. Also, enemy encounters with vehicles are also more engaging, with many cool ass animations like that one part where the brute is trying to steal the warthog from Chief, just being amazing. We also have the idea of melee combos sort of being shown in the demo here, with this 3-point hit combo that Chief does to this brute, which sadly never made it to the final game. Now for another major difference compared to the final game, which actually is the ending cutscene to this demo, which in my opinion could have been an alternate possible introduction to the highway level we got in the final game where you use a scorpion tape. Other minor differences I wanted to mention as well is that the ghost in the demo is more illuminated with more fire and animations similar to Halo Combat Evolve. Also, the brute just act more, well, brutish.
Hey, bro, come on now, dawg.
Pun intended, in the demo. Also, in general, the demo is just more gory with more blood in the demo. Also, you have other lighting changes like the Chief's visor with light and also some other minor differences. And overall, despite all the differences, I think that the demo really works, and it was honestly super ambitious for the time. Its use of destructible, huge open world environments, its unique stencil shading and dynamic lighting all over this massive city area was extremely bold in its attempt. The music in the demo, while used in the final game, is still fantastic as always. The animations seem more dynamic and unique, and in general just showcases the huge potential of Halo 2 with Bungie really ramping up the hype and the promise of the game, and also showcasing their original vision that they had for Halo 2 and what could have been. But sadly, as you will soon see, the demo seemed to be too high in this instance in terms of hype and promise and the scale that Bungie could have actually delivered. Bungie, after the massive success of the Halo 2 E3 demo, they went back to developing the game, high off the praise they received from it. But it soon became clear to many on the team, even before E3, that this version of Halo 2 could not have been made alone to be shipped on the Xbox. It was just way too ambitious. Now, why did the E3 demo end up in infamy, and why did it get cancelled or scrapped? Well, let's get into it. Essentially, Bungie had to make an extremely painful decision to scrap the entire demo in relation to the final game. Many factors led to the scrapping of this demo, first being the extensive pencil engine used for the demo that took Bungie a Hail Mary just to run the game on, but to have it to run the entire final game full of the stencil shadows on the models and normal mapping for the game as well was impossible, as the engine was too difficult to run on Bungie hardware and especially worse on Xbox hardware. So the scrapping of all the work that was done on the engine, including the demo itself, had to be done, with the engine having to be scaled back to make the game run on the Xbox hardware. Another factor in the scrapping of this demo was the release time frame, as even though at this point a firm release date was not announced that would be really until next year's E3 demo for Bungie, the game had to come out by the end of 2004, as it really soon became clear, as that was the last year they could technically get the game out, as the next year the new Xbox would ship, and Microsoft really needed this Halo game to carry the Xbox through its lifetime. So in general, this time frame really contributed to the demo being cut, as the sheer scale of the engine and all the technical problems could not be solved in time for the release date and also the time frame allotted. And well, after the scrapping of the E3 demo, basically after this they had to go into overdrive to redevelop the campaign, including scrapping tons of story elements, beats, and also levels. This also included the multiplayer for the game as well, and also many other technical aspects like the graphics and also normal maps as well, as everything just had to be scaled down to make the game come out for its release date. And eventually later on, we all know that Halo 2 finally got released, with many elements of the demo not showing up, and well, actually some weirdly do showing up. I do want to get into some of the comparisons to the E3 demo and also some of the things that did show up in the final game. One of those is actually normal mapping, which did make it to the final game, unlike all the dynamic lighting and stencil shadows that got cut from the final game. Also, skeletons and remnants of this demo also appear in the final game, like the beginning of the outskirts level is similar to the final game in some aspect, with Chief on the Pelican. And of course, other gameplay elements like vehicle hijacking and dual wielding obviously made it to the final game. Regardless though, the infamy and mystery behind this demo will continue to increase even after the final game's release, as many realized it showed a more epic and also more mysterious version of the game we never got. To Bungie's credit, they did openly discuss the failure of the demo and its legacy as a whole, which I do have to give to Bungie for doing so, as a lot of companies don't like to admit their own mistake. For in terms of the actual aftermath of the demo, well, the demo was actually released online from taped videos of Bungie's presentation and also the live stream as well, really showcasing its history and Halo community. But aside from these actual video presentations that were released online, it was unclear whether the demo was actually still playable or even somewhere in the files at one of the studios, either at Bungie or at the time 343. But soon all new information was brought to light, as in 2018, 343 Studios, or Halo Studios now, actually did a stream with Frank O'Connor and actually played the demo live on a live stream. And honestly, it was pretty amazing. It showed that the demo was actually still playable and a build of it was somewhere at the studio. And despite rumors of it actually crashing sometimes, it actually was fully playable and ran pretty fine in the stream itself. And even after this stream years later at some Halo tournaments, the E3 demo would actually still continue to be shown, really showcasing the importance of this demo in the Halo history. And eventually on the 20th anniversary of Halo 2's release, the Dig Site team, yes the Dig Site team, released a demo officially for playable people on the Steam Workshop. It's honestly just amazing. I actually got my chance to play it, and honestly I'm so proud of it, and I think it's awesome that we actually have the ability to play the demo now. Overall, to wrap up, I personally love the E3 demo from Halo 2. I like how ambitious it was. The amazing stencil and dynamic lighting that came with it really made the demo impressive and made the game more pretty to look at. Also, the scale and how big the level truly was, and all the sheer feats of gameplay that were accomplished during it were honestly amazing. And even though I'm pretty happy with the final game that we got, I think that this is honestly a really engaging story and really shows a version of Halo 2 that we honestly could have gotten. But also the tale of the E3 demo also teaches us some important lessons, as sometimes reaching too high and setting the bar too high can sometimes cost you in the end. And Bungie definitely learned this lesson with the E3 demo from Halo 2. Still though, regardless of all the troubles that came with this, the Halo 2 E3 demo from 2003 is one of the best video game presentations of all time, really showing the ambition and also the power of demos, and also showcasing many of the new elements of the presentation that honestly have made it cemented in history. Overall, if you liked this video about the Halo 2 E3 demo from 2003, please comment, subscribe, and honestly have a really good and nice day. Peace.